more like the word we know nowadays. Greater democracy and equality were introduced. Before 1832 in Great Britain, there was limited suffrage. Only high-class men who owned property could vote. This was the 5% of the population in Great Britain. After 1832, with the Reform Bill, it extended the suffrage, but only added 2% to it. The Reform Bill made suffrage less strict. This led 7% of the population in Great Britain to vote.
Although the Reform Bill increased the number of British voters, only a limited amount of British men could have the right to vote. And later on, a popular movement called the Chartist movement was a movement that increased the number of British voters, of only men British voters. The Chartist movement increased 21% of the population.
After the Chartist movement, Victoria came to the throne. During her rule, Britain reached to its peak of power and wealth. Under the command of Victoria, Britain increased suffrage. By 1890, Victoria finally achieved to give women the right to vote. Since women were half the population of Great Britain, the percentage of suffrage increased by 46%.
France's way to full democracy was much more harder than the one in England because of several reasons. First, France's monarchy was a lot more powerful than the one in Britain. Second of all, France had a much smaller middle class than the one in Britain, which made the process a lot harder. It made the process harder because there was a much less percent of educated people. France's road to democracy was full of political movements such as Zionism and anti-Semitism. Zionism is the prejudice that French people had against Jews, and anti-Semitism is the movement when the Jews reestablished their ancient homeland, Israel. All of these movements affected positively the suffrage of France. By the 1800s, Great Britain had colonies all around the world. The three most important colonies that they had were Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. These colonies started developing and becoming stronger and stronger until they were able to stay at their own.
Canada struggles a lot trying to stand by their own because of many reasons. Many Native Americans were living in Canadian territory. By mid-1800s, many Canadians believed that Canada needed a central-owned government. In other words, they wanted to become an independent nation.
In 1867, Nova Scotia and New Brunswick joined the province of Canada in a union called the Dominion. Then Canada expanded even more westward. Like this, Canada started gaining more and more power and land until a point that it becomes so powerful to independize from England. When British people came to Australia and New Zealand, they realized that the land was almost inhabited at all, and only a small amount of nomadic people lived there. Although they found the land almost inhabited, they found many sheep that had quality wool. And because not many people wanted to go to this land, British government offered a piece of this land to the people that went to New Zealand and Australia to colonize.
Like Canadians, the colonies of Australia and New Zealand wanted to rule by themselves, yet remaining in British Empire. During 1850, Australia and New Zealand became self-governing because of the parliamentary forms of the government. In 1901, Australian colonies were united under federal constitution. Later, they became dominion. English expansion into Ireland began in the 12th century, when the Pope granted control of England to the English king. It was not until the second half of 1800s that oppositions to British rule over the island took two forms. Some Irish want total independence from Ireland for Ireland, but the greater amount of Irish prefer home rule, or local control over internal matters only. Gabriel.
Then, the British, fearful toward the independence of Ireland, refused to consider either option. Frustrated over the delay of gaining their independence, a small group of Irish rebelled during Easter week of 1914. Later, they were able to gain independence, but just for a little part of Ireland. Years later, they seeked for full independence until they finally achieved to stand on their own.
The U.S. won independence from Britain in 1783. At the end of the Revolutionary War, the Mississippi River marked the western boundaries of the new republic. It was a land filled of shelter, land-hungry workers pushed beyond the Mississippi. The government helped them acquire new land for sheltering. Meanwhile, tensions between northern and southern states over the issue of the states' rights and slavery continued to grow until it reached its peak.
The USA started extending their territories in 1803 when the President Thomas Jefferson bought the Louisiana Territory from France. Now the US was double the size of the original US, and it extended to the Rocky Mountains.
In 1819, Spain gave Florida to the US.
In 1846, a treaty with England gave the US part of Oregon.
Mexico has gained their independence from Spain in 1812. With permission of Mexico, American shelters moved down to Mexican territory. However, the shelters were unhappy with Mexico rule. In 1836, Texans revolted against Mexicans, and they won their independence.
In 1846 and February of 1848, a war raged between US and Mexico. Finally, Mexico surrendered. Mexico ceded California to the US.
America's westward expansion raised questions about what laws and customs should be followed in the West. Since nation's first days, the northern and the south part of the U.S. has always followed a different way of life. Each section wanted to extend their way of life to this new territory in the West. The North has a diverse economy. They have both farm and industries. The southern economy, on the other hand, was just a few cash crops, mainly cotton. The economy difference between the North and the South led a conflict over slavery.
Okay, the conflict between the North and the South America reached a climax when Abraham Lincoln won the elections of presidents in 1860. Abraham Lincoln promised to stop the spread of slavery, and the south part of the United States opposed. One by one, southern states began to secede and withdraw from the Union. These states came together as a Confederation States of America. In 1861, the U.S. Civil War started. It started when President Abraham Lincoln ordered the Army to bring back the rebel states. 4 consecutive years of fighting followed the U.S. until in 1865, the southern part of the U.S. had to surrender.
The Industrial Revolution happened because of many inventions. By the late 1800s, advances in both industry and technology were occurring faster than ever before. By the late 1800s, growing industries spurred even greater advance in technology. A surge in scientific discoveries pushed the frontiers of knowledge forward. At the same time, the industrialized countries were growing economies and demanded social changes. This gave inventions that makes a life easy, give invention in science, give invention in medicine.
During this period of time, many technological inventions were coming to the world. Thomas Edison invented the light bulb and the phonograph. Both inventions improved daily life. ¿Aló? Sorry. Talking about phones, do you know who invented the phone? The phone was invented in 1876 by Alexander Bell. The invention of the telephone improved communication after the invention of the telegraph. Later, Marconi created the first radio using electromagnetic waves. Later, invention that improved transportation came. German inventors introduced the first automobile. Later, invention that improved distance transportation came. This was the invention of the airplane. This was invented by the Wright brothers.
An important breakdown in the history of science is the germ theory of disease. It was developed by the French chemist Louis Pasteur. While examining the fertilization process of alcohol, he discovered a microscopic organism called bacteria. He also learned that you can kill bacteria with heat. This led to the process of pasteurization, that is used to kill germs in liquids such as milk. Joseph Lister, a British, read about Pasteur's work. He thought germs might explain why half of surgical patients died of infections. In 1865, he ordered that his surgical wards must be cleaned. As a result, 80% of Lister patients survived. Other hospitals started to adopt Lister methods. Meanwhile, medical research developed vaccines. These vaccines were used for deadly disease. These advances in science help people to live longer and have a healthier life.
After the new ideas in medicine, new ideas in science arose. Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, the strongest fetus survived, brought controversy to the world of science. Later, advances in chemistry and physics occurred. Pierre and Marie Curie discovered new elements with powerful sources of energy. Later, many inventions in science came.